In a remote countryside, hidden from the eyes of the world, an act of unimaginable cruelty sets the stage for a story that will move you to your core. A heartless farmer ties a helpless Mustang Mare and her newborn foal to a tree, abandoning them as prey for the wolves that stalk the forest shadows. The mare fights against the ropes, her instincts urging her to protect her baby. But as the night grows darker and the howls of wolves grow louder, their chances seem to slip away. Just when all hope appears lost, a stranger enters the picture. What follows is a breathtaking tale of courage, survival, and redemption that you won't be able to forget. Stay with us for a story that will remind you of the unbreakable bonds of love and the power of compassion. The sun was setting over the open plains, painting the sky in hues of red and orange. On the edge of a small farm, a wild Mustang Mare stood with her newborn foal beside her, their coats glinting in the last rays of sunlight. They had wandered onto the farmer's land seeking shelter after the foal's birth, but their presence was far from welcome. The farmer, a man hardened by years of misfortune and bitterness, muttered angrily as he grabbed a coarse rope. Nuisance animals, he spat under his breath. The mare's ears flicked nervously as he approached. Her instincts screamed danger, but she couldn't leave her baby, whose wobbly legs could barely hold him up. Within moments, the farmer looped the rope around the mare's neck, pulling her roughly toward the edge of the forest. The foal cried out, struggling to follow, as the farmer dragged them both to a large oak tree deep within the woods. "This will keep you from coming back," he muttered, tying them tightly to the tree. The ropes cut into the mare's skin, but she didn't flinch. She positioned herself protectively between her baby and the farmer, her eyes fierce with determination. Satisfied with his work, the farmer stepped back, admiring his cruel solution. "Let the wolves take care of you," he said coldly before turning on his heel and disappearing into the fading light. As darkness descended, the forest came alive with ominous sounds. The mare tugged desperately at the ropes, but they only tightened with every pull. Her foal lay at her feet, trembling from exhaustion and fear. The wind carried the distant howls of wolves, their voices weaving through the trees like a haunting melody. The mare let out a low, guttural whinny, her muscles trembling as she tried once more to break free. But the ropes held firm. She bent her neck to nuzzle her baby, who let out a weak, pitiful cry. The sound pierced the night, echoing into the shadows. The wolves heard it too. Glowing eyes began to appear in the darkness, moving closer with every passing minute. The mare's ears flicked back, and her body tensed. She stomped her hooves and let out a fierce snort, a mother's primal instinct to protect her young kicking in. But she was outnumbered, and the wolves were hungry. The night grew colder, and the wolves came closer, circling just beyond the reach of the mare's hooves. They snarled and growled, their sharp teeth glinting in the dim moonlight. The foal cried again, and the mare let out a piercing neigh that seemed to push the predators back momentarily. Meanwhile, just a few miles away, a young rancher named Luke was mending a broken fence along his property. The distant sound of the mare's cry made him pause. He strained his ears, unsure if what he'd heard was real. Then he heard it again, a desperate, haunting whinny that sent chills down his spine. Grabbing his lantern and rifle, Luke saddled his horse and headed in the direction of the sound. His heart pounded in his chest as he navigated the dark trails, the eerie howls of wolves growing louder with every step. He didn't know what he would find, but something deep inside urged him forward. As he approached the clearing, the beam of his lantern caught the glow of several pairs of eyes. Wolves. A chill ran down his spine as he raised the rifle, firing a warning shot into the air. The sharp crack of the gun startled the wolves, scattering them into the shadows for the moment. The light of the lantern fell on the mare, her body trembling, but still standing protectively over her foal. Luke dismounted, his boots crunching against the wet leaves as he approached. "Easy, girl," he said softly, holding the lantern high to get a better look. The sight broke his heart. The mare's sides heaved with exhaustion, and the foal lay motionless at her feet, its tiny body too weak to stand. Luke set down the lantern and pulled out a knife, his hands trembling. "I'm going to get you out of here," he whispered. The mare's dark eyes locked onto his, a mixture of fear and hope flickering in their depths. She didn't move as he began cutting the ropes, her body frozen with tension. But the wolves weren't gone for good. From the corner of his eye, Luke saw movement in the shadows. They were regrouping, their growls growing louder as they prepared to strike again. The ropes finally gave way, falling to the ground with a soft thud. The mare let out a low whinny and stepped forward cautiously, her body trembling from exhaustion. Her foal stirred weakly at her feet, its legs wobbling as it tried to stand. Luke crouched low, extending his hand toward the mare. "It's okay," he said gently, his voice calm and steady. "You're free now, but we've got to move." The mare's ears flicked back and forth, her eyes darting between Luke and the surrounding forest. She could sense the wolves lingering just beyond. The reach of the lantern light, their growls rising in unison, she snorted loudly, stomping her hooves in warning, but her body swayed from the effort. Luke glanced over his shoulder, the beam of the lantern catching the faint gleam of the wolves' eyes in the darkness. They were circling closer, emboldened by their numbers. His grip on the rifle tightened. "We don't have much time," he uttered, glancing down at the foal. The little one looked so fragile, its small body barely able to hold its own weight. With no other choice, Luke made a split-second decision. He scooped the foal into his arms, cradling its trembling body against his chest. The mare let out a sharp, startled neigh, stepping forward as if to protest. "Easy, girl," Luke said firmly. "I'm not leaving him behind." The mare hesitated for a moment before following Luke. As he began backing toward his horse, the wolves growled, louder, their glowing eyes closing in from all sides. Luke fired another warning shot into the air, the crack of the rifle echoing through the trees. The wolves scattered briefly, their shapes disappearing into the shadows, but Luke knew they wouldn't stay gone for long. "Hurry," he urged the mare, his voice low but urgent. She followed closely, her steps unsteady but determined. As they moved toward the trail where Luke's horse waited, the rain-soaked ground made the journey slow and treacherous, the mud clinging to their feet with every step. The wolves didn't take long to regroup. Luke could hear them again, their snarls growing louder, their glowing eyes reappearing in the darkness. He felt the foal shiver in his arms, its small heart racing against his chest. "We're almost there," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was trying to reassure the foal or himself. When they reached his horse, Luke quickly secured the foal in the saddlebag, ensuring it was snug and safe. The mare stood close, her body brushing against Luke as if seeking comfort. He patted her neck gently. "I need you to trust me, okay? We're getting out of here." But the wolves weren't waiting any longer. They emerged from the shadows, their snarls ripping through the air as they lunged toward the group. Luke raised his rifle and fired, the shot hitting the ground just in front of the pack. The wolves hesitated but didn't retreat. Their hunger was stronger than their fear. The mare reared up suddenly, letting out a loud, piercing neigh that seemed to shake the forest. Her hooves lashed out, striking the air as she positioned herself protectively in front of Luke and the foal. Luke fired another shot, this time aiming just over the wolves' heads. They flinched and scattered slightly, but their eyes never left the group. Luke knew they couldn't stay there. He mounted his horse, pulling the reins with one hand while holding the rifle with the other. "Let's go," he shouted, his voice cutting through. Luke set down the lantern and pulled out a knife, his hands trembling. "I'm going to get you out of here," he whispered. The mare's dark eyes locked onto his, a mixture of fear and hope flickering in their depths. She didn't move as he began cutting the ropes, her body frozen with tension. But the wolves weren't gone for good. From the corner of his eye, Luke saw movement in the shadows. They were regrouping, their growls growing louder as they prepared to strike again. The ropes finally gave way, falling to the ground with a soft thud. The mare let out a low whinny and stepped forward cautiously, her body trembling from exhaustion. Her foal stirred weakly at her feet, its legs wobbling as it tried to stand. Luke crouched low, extending his hand toward the mare. "It's okay," he said gently, his voice calm and steady. "You're free now, but we've got to move." The mare's ears flicked back and forth, her eyes darting between Luke and the surrounding forest. She could sense the wolves lingering just beyond the reach of the lantern light, their growls rising in unison. She snorted loudly, stomping her hooves in warning, but her body swayed from the effort. Luke glanced over his shoulder, the beam of the lantern catching the faint gleam of the wolves' eyes in the darkness. They were circling closer, emboldened by their numbers. His grip on the rifle tightened. "We don't have much time," he uttered, glancing down at the foal. The little one looked so fragile, its small body barely able to hold its own weight. With no other choice, Luke made a split-second decision. He scooped the foal into his arms. Cradling its trembling body against his chest, the mare let out a sharp, startled neigh, stepping forward as if to protest. "Easy, girl," Luke said firmly. "I'm not leaving him behind." The mare hesitated for a moment before following Luke as he began backing toward his horse. The wolves growled louder, their glowing eyes closing in from all sides. Luke fired another warning shot into the air, the crack of the rifle echoing through the trees. The wolves scattered briefly, their shapes disappearing into the shadows, but Luke knew they wouldn't stay gone for long. "Hurry," he urged the mare, his voice low but urgent. She followed closely, her steps unsteady but determined. As they moved toward the trail where Luke's horse waited, the rain-soaked ground made the journey slow and treacherous, the mud clinging to their feet with every step. The wolves didn't take long to regroup. Luke could hear them again, their snarls growing louder, their glowing eyes reappearing in the darkness. He felt the full shiver in his arms, its small heart racing against his chest. "We're almost there," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was trying to reassure the foal or himself. When they reached his horse, Luke quickly secured the foal in the saddlebag. Ensuring it was snug and safe, the mare stood close, her body brushing against Luke as if seeking comfort. He patted her neck gently. "I need you to trust me, okay? We're getting out of here." But the wolves weren't waiting any longer. They emerged from the shadows, their snarls ripping through the air as they lunged toward the group. Luke raised his rifle and fired, the shot hitting the ground just in front of the pack. The wolves hesitated but didn't retreat. Their hunger was stronger than their fear. The mare reared up suddenly, letting out a loud, piercing neigh that seemed to shake the forest. Her hooves lashed out, striking the air as she positioned herself protectively in front of Luke and the foal. Luke fired another shot, this time aiming just over the wolves' heads. They flinched and scattered slightly, but their eyes never left the group. Luke knew they couldn't stay there. He mounted his horse, pulling the reins with one hand while holding the rifle with the other. "Let's go," he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. The mare bolted alongside his horse, her exhaustion forgotten in the face of danger. The sound of her hooves pounding against the wet ground was matched by the growls and snapping jaws of the wolves giving chase. The forest seemed endless, the trees blurring together as they raced through the darkness. Luke's heart pounded in his chest, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He glanced back briefly, catching sight of the wolves gaining on them. "Hold on, girl," he shouted to the mare, his voice filled with urgency. The path opened up ahead, the faint glow of the horizon signaling they were nearing the edge of the forest. Luke urged his horse forward, the mare keeping pace beside him. The foal let out a weak cry from the saddlebag, its small voice cutting through the night with one final burst of speed. The chaos, the mare bolted alongside his horse, her exhaustion forgotten in the face of danger. The sound of her hooves pounding against the wet ground was matched by the growls and snapping jaws of the wolves giving chase. The forest seemed endless, the trees blurring together as they raced through the darkness. Luke's heart pounded in his chest, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He glanced back briefly, catching sight of the wolves gaining on them. "Hold on, girl," he shouted to the mare, his voice filled with urgency. The path opened up ahead, the faint glow of the horizon signaling they were nearing the edge of the forest. Luke urged his horse forward, the mare keeping pace beside him. The foal let out a weak cry from the saddlebag, its small voice cutting through the night with one final burst of speed. They broke through the trees and into the open plains. The wolves stopped at the edge of the forest, their snarls fading into the distance as they retreated into the shadows. Luke slowed his horse, his breaths coming in heavy gasps as he glanced back at the mare. She was trembling, her sides heaving from the effort, but her head was held high, her eyes scanning the horizon. Luke dismounted and approached her slowly, placing a reassuring hand on her neck. "You did it," he said softly. "You kept him safe." The Mare let out a soft whinny, lowering her head to nuzzle her foal. Luke watched in silence, his heart swelling with a mix of relief and admiration. Despite everything, they had made it out alive. The first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, casting soft golden hues across the rain-soaked plains. Luke stood beside his horse, catching his breath as he watched the mare nuzzle her foal. The little one, still weak but alive, rested on trembling legs, leaning into its mother for comfort. The wolves were gone, their howls fading into the forest behind them, but the tension still hung in the air. Luke crouched beside the mare, running a hand along her neck. "We're not safe yet," he murmured, "but we'll get you somewhere you can rest." The mare flicked her ears toward him, her dark eyes watching his every move. She still seemed wary, but there was something else in her gaze now, an unspoken gratitude, a glimmer of trust. Luke turned his attention to the foal. Its tiny frame trembled with exhaustion, and its breathing was shallow. He placed a gentle hand on its side, feeling the faint rise and fall of its chest. "You're a fighter," he said softly. "Just hold on a little longer." Realizing the journey wasn't over, Luke quickly fashioned a makeshift sling from a blanket and secured the foal onto his horse. The mare watched closely, stepping forward every time Luke adjusted the straps. "Don't worry," he assured her. "I'll be careful." With the foal safely secured, Luke mounted his horse and grabbed the reins. The mare hesitated, her body tense as if unsure whether to follow. Luke clicked his tongue softly and extended a hand. "Come on, girl, you don't want to stay here." For a moment, the mare stood still, her muscles taut and her ears pinned back. Then, with a deep snort, she stepped forward, falling into stride beside the horse. Luke smiled, relief washing over him. "That's it. Let's get you somewhere safe." As they moved across the open plains, the rising sun painted the landscape in shades of gold and orange. The storm clouds had all but disappeared, leaving the air fresh and cool. The mare walked close to Luke's horse, her nose occasionally brushing the foal's small body as if to reassure herself it was still there. The journey back to Luke's ranch was slow. The foal stirred occasionally, letting out soft whimpers that tugged at Luke's heart. He reached back to adjust the blanket, murmuring words of comfort. "We're almost there," he said, though he wasn't entirely sure if he was reassuring the foal or himself. When the wooden fences of Luke's ranch finally came into view, a wave of relief swept over him. The familiar sight of the barn and open paddocks filled him with a sense of hope. "We made it," he said aloud, patting his horse's neck. Luke dismounted near the barn and carefully untied the sling, cradling the foal in his arms as he led the mare inside. The barn was warm and dry, the smell of hay and fresh feed filling the air. Luke gently laid the foal on a bed of straw, wrapping it in another blanket. The mare followed closely, lowering her head to nuzzle her baby. The foal let out a soft sigh, its small body relaxing for the first time since the ordeal began. The mare stood over it, her posture protective but calm. Luke leaned against the barn door, his chest heaving as the weight of the night's events finally hit him. He grabbed a bucket and filled it with water, setting it down near the mare. "Here," he said, stepping back to give her space. She sniffed the bucket cautiously before taking a few slow sips. Her muscles seemed to relax, and for the first time Luke noticed just how beautiful she was. Despite the mud and rain-soaked coat, there was a strength and grace about her that was impossible to ignore. Luke knelt beside the foal, gently brushing the straw from its coat. "You're safe now," he said softly, "both of you." The mare's dark eyes met his, and for a moment, there was a connection that went beyond words. It was as if she understood what he was saying, as if she knew this man had saved her and her baby. As the sun climbed higher into the sky, warmth began to seep into the barn, drying the mare's coat and filling the space with a sense of calm. Luke stood and stretched, his body aching from the long night. "You've been through a lot," he said, looking at the mare and her foal, "but you're going to be okay now. I'll make sure of it." He grabbed some fresh hay and spread it on the ground, creating a soft bed for the pair. The mare settled down beside her baby, her body curling protectively round the foal. Luke watched them for a while, his heart swelling with relief and determination. He knew this was only the beginning of their journey, but for now, They were safe, and that was all that mattered. The ranch felt quiet as the sun climbed higher, its warm light casting long shadows over the open fields. Inside the barn, the mare and her foal rested on the bed of hay Luke had prepared. The foal, wrapped snugly in a blanket, lay nestled against its mother, letting out soft, rhythmic breaths as it slept. For the first time since he'd found them, Luke allowed himself a moment of calm, but the peace was fragile. The events of the night still lingered in his mind, the sharp growls, the glowing eyes, the desperation in the mare's cries as she fought to protect her baby. The wolves hadn't followed them to the ranch, but Luke knew better than to assume they wouldn't return. The forest was close, and hunger could drive the pack back at any moment. Luke stood outside the barn, scanning the horizon as he leaned against the wooden doorframe. His rifle rested beside him, loaded and ready just in case. The mare's soft whinny broke the silence, and Luke turned to see her standing over the foal, her head lowered as she nudged the baby gently. "You're still on edge," Luke said softly. Stepping into the barn, the mare's ears twitched at the sound of his voice, but she didn't shy away. Her dark eyes followed him as he approached, her muscles tensing slightly. "I don't blame you. After what you've been through, I'd be on edge too." Luke crouched beside the foal, checking the blanket he'd wrapped it in. The little one stirred slightly, letting out a tiny whimper before settling back into the hay. "He's a fighter," Luke murmured, "just like you." The mare sniffed at Luke's hand, her breath warm against his skin. It was the first time she'd approached him without hesitation, and Luke's heart swelled with relief and pride. "You're starting to trust me." "Huh," he said with a faint smile. "That's good. We're in this together now." The rest of the day passed slowly, with Luke dividing his time between tending to the horses and reinforcing the ranch's defenses. He strengthened the fences, double-checked the barn doors, and set up lanterns around the perimeter to keep the area well lit at night. He wasn't taking any chances if the wolves came back. He'd be ready. As night fell, the temperature dropped, and a chill settled over the ranch. Luke lit a lantern inside the barn, casting a warm glow over the space. The mare stood protectively over her foal, her ears flicking at every sound outside. Luke leaned against a bale of hay, his rifle resting across his lap. "You don't have to worry," he said, his voice low and soothing. "I'm not letting anything happen to you or your baby." The mare let out a soft snort, her gaze shifting to Luke. It was almost as if she understood his words, as if she could sense the sincerity behind them. Luke watched her for a moment, marveling at her strength and resilience. She'd been through so much, yet she stood tall, unwavering in her determination to protect her foal outside. The wind howled, and the distant rustling of leaves sent shivers down Luke's spine. He stood and walked to the barn door, peering out into the darkness. The lanterns he'd set up flickered faintly, their light casting long shadows across the yard. Then he heard a faint, distant howl that sent a chill racing down his back. Luke's grip on the rifle tightened as he stepped outside, his eyes scanning the tree line at the edge of the property. The wolves were out there. He couldn't see them, but he could feel their presence, lurking just beyond the reach of the light. Luke turned back to the barn, closing the door behind him. The mare had heard the howl too. She stood rigid, her ears pinned back and her body tense. The foal stirred beneath her, letting out a soft cry. "It's okay," Luke said, his voice steady. "They're not getting past me, not tonight." He sat back down on the hay, keeping his rifle close. The hours crept by, the silence broken only by the occasional rustle of the wind or the distant cry of a wolf. Luke's eyes remained fixed on the barn doors, his body alert and ready. The mare eventually lay down beside her foal, curling her body protectively around him. Luke watched them in the soft light of the lantern, his heart heavy with a mix of worry and determination. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't going to let those wolves win. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Luke finally allowed himself to relax. The wolves hadn't attacked, and the ranch remained untouched. He stood and stretched, his body aching from the long night. The mare opened her eyes, her gaze meeting his as she let out a low, contented whinny. "You made it through the night," Luke said softly, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "You're safe now." The foal stirred, letting out a soft yawn before nuzzling into its mother's side. Luke leaned against the barn door, watching the sunlight filter into the space. For the first time in days, he felt a glimmer of hope. The first rays of morning sunlight spilled across the ranch, bathing the barn in a soft golden glow. The storm had passed, leaving the world quiet and still, save for the occasional chirp of birds in the distance. Inside the barn, Luke sat beside the mare and her foal, his back resting against a bale of hay. The exhaustion of the past 2 nights weighed heavily on him, but there was a faint spark of hope in his chest. The foal stirred beneath its mother, stretching its thin legs and letting out a soft whinny. Luke smiled, leaning forward to check on the little one. "You're getting stronger, huh?" he said softly, his voice filled with warmth. "That's good. You're tougher than you look." The mare nuzzled her baby gently, her ears flicking forward as she relaxed for the first time in days. Her coat, once matted with mud and rain, now glistened faintly in the sunlight filtering through the barn. Luke reached out cautiously, his hand brushing against her neck. She didn't flinch this time. Instead, she turned her head slightly, as if acknowledging his touch. Luke chuckled. "We're making progress, aren't we?" he said. "You're starting to trust me." He stood and grabbed a bucket of fresh water and a few handfuls of hay. Setting them down beside the mare, she sniffed the water cautiously before drinking deeply, her body visibly relaxing. The foal tried to mimic her, dipping its nose into the bucket only to sneeze and step back in surprise. Luke laughed, the sound echoing softly in the quiet barn. As the day went on, Luke began reinforcing the ranch's fences and securing the perimeter. The memory of the wolves still lingered in his mind, and he wasn't taking any chances. He set up additional lanterns around the property, making sure there were no gaps in the defenses. Every so often, he would glance back toward the barn, ensuring the mare and foal were still safe. The bond forming between them was undeniable. The mare, once wary and defensive, now seemed to look to Luke for reassurance, and the foal, growing stronger with each passing hour, had started following him around the barn whenever he came in to check on them. By mid-afternoon, Luke decided to let the pair out into the paddock for some fresh air. He opened the barn doors, carefully guiding the mare and foal out into the sunlight. The foal stumbled slightly on its unsteady legs, but quickly found its footing, letting out an excited whinny as it took its first few steps onto the soft grass. The mare stayed close, her gaze sweeping across the open paddock as if searching for danger. Luke stood by the gate, watching as the foal began to explore, its small frame silhouetted against the golden light. The mare followed her steps, slow and deliberate, but there was a newfound ease in her movements. Luke leaned against the fence, his arms crossed as he watched the pair. For the first time, he felt a sense of peace settle over him. "You're going to be okay. Here," he said quietly, as if the words were meant for both the mare and himself. But his moment of calm was interrupted by a sound that sent a chill down his spine. A distant, haunting howl carried on the wind. Luke straightened, his eyes scanning the horizon. The wolves were still out there. The mare heard it too, her ears pinned back, and she let out a sharp snort, positioning herself protectively in front of the foal. Luke grabbed his rifle from where it rested against the fence, his heart pounding. In his chest, "Not today," he muttered, gripping the weapon tightly. He stayed by the paddock, his eyes fixed on the distant tree line. The minutes stretched into hours, and though the howls faded, the tension remained. The mare eventually relaxed, but Luke stayed vigilant, unwilling to let his guard down. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange, Luke guided the mare and foal back into the barn. The foal hesitated at the door, letting out a playful whinny as if protesting the end of its adventure. Luke chuckled gently, nudging it inside. "You've had enough excitement for one day," he said. Inside the barn, the mare settled down in the fresh hay, her foal curling up beside her. Luke leaned against the doorframe, his rifle still in hand. He watched as the foal drifted off to sleep, its tiny body rising and falling with each breath. The mare glanced at him, her dark eyes soft and calm. "You're safe now," Luke said, softly, his voice filled with quiet determination. "As long as you're here, I won't let anything happen to you." The moon rose high over the ranch, casting a silver glow across the fields. The wolves didn't return that night, but Luke remained awake, keeping watch over the barn. The bond between him and the mare had deepened, and though the road ahead was still uncertain, he knew one thing for sure: they were no longer alone. The following days brought peace to the ranch, though Luke remained cautious. Each morning, the sun rose over the open fields, melting away the remnants of the storm and filling the air with warmth. The mare and her foal had begun to adjust to their new surroundings, and with each passing day, their strength and spirit grew. Luke watched from the paddock gate as the foal, now steadier on its legs, darted clumsily through the grass. It stumbled occasionally, but its determination never wavered. The mare followed closely, her gaze constantly scanning the horizon. Though her maternal instincts remained sharp, her movements were no longer frantic or filled with fear. She was beginning to trust the safety of the ranch and Luke. "You've got some real fight in you, don't you?" Luke said, a soft smile spreading across his face as the foal attempted to nuzzle him through the fence. Its soft nose bumped his hand, and he reached down to stroke its small head. The mare snorted sharply at first but didn't pull the foal away this time. Instead, she watched with cautious but growing acceptance. Luke had named the foal Brave, after its remarkable endurance through the ordeal. The mare, with her fierce and protective nature, had begun calling Hope. The names felt fitting, a testament to their resilience and the journey they had endured together. As the days turned into a week, Hope's trust in Luke deepened. She no longer flinched when he approached, and she even allowed him to run his hands along her neck and back. Luke marveled at her strength, admiring the way her coat now gleamed in the sunlight. Free of mud and rain, she was a symbol of survival, a wild spirit that had refused to give up. One afternoon, while repairing a section of the paddock fence, Luke noticed something unusual. Hope had ventured farther from Brave than she normally would, her steps slow and deliberate as she grazed near the far end of the enclosure. Brave, meanwhile, was playing near the barn, testing his newfound energy by chasing after the ranch's resident chickens. Luke couldn't help but laugh as one particularly grumpy hen squawked and flapped its wings, sending Brave scurrying back toward his mother. "You'll figure it out," Luke called, shaking his head, but his moment of amusement was short-lived. A faint rustling in the distance caught his attention, and he turned toward the tree line. The forest beyond the ranch seemed quiet, but Luke's gut told him otherwise. He grabbed his rifle and climbed onto the nearest fence post, scanning. The horizon stretched wide, no wolves in sight, but their presence lingered in Luke's mind like a shadow that refused to fade. That night, Luke doubled the ranch's defenses. He reinforced the barn doors, added more lanterns around the perimeter, and set up a makeshift alarm system using string and old metal cans. He wasn't taking any chances. Hope and Brave had come too far to lose everything now. Inside the barn, Hope lay curled protectively around Brave, her body a barrier of warmth and security. Luke sat nearby, his rifle resting across his lap. The flickering lantern cast a soft glow over the space, creating a cocoon of safety within the darkness. The night was quiet, but Luke remained on edge, his ears attuned to every creak and rustle. As he watched Hope and Brave, he felt a profound sense of responsibility settle over him. These weren't just animals in need of rescue, they were a family, and in some unspoken way, they had become part of his own. "You've been through so much," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper, "but you've made it this far. You're stronger than you know." Hope opened her eyes briefly, her gaze meeting Luke's for a moment. It felt as though she understood him, her dark eyes filled with quiet gratitude. Luke smiled, leaning back against the wall. "We're in this together," he murmured. The following morning, the ranch was bathed in sunlight, the fields glowing with fresh dew. Hope and Brave ventured out into the paddock as usual, but something about their demeanor had changed. There was a lightness to their movements, a sense of freedom that hadn't been there before. Brave galloped across the grass, his tiny hooves kicking up dirt, while Hope watched from a distance, her stance relaxed. Luke leaned against the paddock gate, his arms crossed as he observed them. He felt a pang of emotion in his chest, a mix of pride and sadness. He knew their time at the ranch wouldn't last forever. Hope and Brave belonged in the wild, running free with their own kind. Keeping them here would be selfish, no matter how much he'd grown attached to them. As Brave bounded back to Hope, nuzzling her side, Luke took a deep breath. He would give them time to fully heal, to grow stronger, but when the moment was right, he would let them go. It was the hardest decision he'd ever have to make, but he knew it was the right one. For now, though, he focused on the present. Hope and Brave were safe, alive, and thriving, and that was enough. The weeks that followed were transformative, not just for Hope and Brave, but for Luke as well. The foal, once fragile and unable to stand, now raced across the open paddock with boundless energy. His legs, once shaky, now carried him with confidence as he explored every corner of the ranch. Hope had regained her strength, to her coat glossy and her posture regal. The mare was a picture of resilience, her protective instincts still sharp, but her demeanor far more at ease. Luke stood by the paddock gate one crisp morning. The air tinged with the scent of fresh dew and hay. The rising sun painted the horizon in hues of pink and orange, casting a golden light over the ranch. Hope and Brave grazed peacefully there, silhouettes glowing in the early light. Luke took a deep breath, his heart heavy with the decision he had been avoiding. The time had come. "You've both healed," he said softly, almost as if they could hear his thoughts. "You're strong enough now to go back where you belong." It wasn't a decision he came to easily. Over the weeks, Luke had grown deeply attached to the pair. Their presence had filled a quiet corner of his life, bringing him purpose and joy he hadn't realized he was missing. But he knew keeping them here would be selfish. Hope and Brave belonged in the wild, running free with their herd. That evening, Luke prepared for their release. He led Hope and Brave out of the paddock and into the open field that bordered the ranch. The mare walked calmly beside him, her trust in him unwavering. Brave pranced ahead, his energy boundless as he nipped at the tall grass. Luke smiled, though his chest tightened with every step. The open plains stretched endlessly before them, merging with a distant horizon. Luke had spotted a herd of wild mustangs in the area a few days earlier, and he was certain they were still nearby. As they reached the edge of the field, Luke stopped and crouched down beside Brave, running a hand along the foal's small, muscular frame. "You've grown so much," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're going to be just fine out there." Brave nudged Luke's shoulder, letting out a playful snort. Luke chuckled softly, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. He turned to Hope, who stood a few paces away, her dark eyes fixed on him. She let out a low, rumbling whinny, her body shifting slightly as if she could sense what was about to happen. Luke rose to his feet, brushing the dust off his jeans. He reached out and placed a hand on Hope's neck, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you," he said, "for trusting me, for letting me help you." For a moment, Hope stood still, her gaze locked on Luke's. It was as though she understood, as though she was saying her own silent goodbye. Then she turned, her powerful legs carrying her a few steps away before stopping to glance back at him. Brave hesitated, his playful energy momentarily subdued as he trotted back to Luke's side. Luke knelt down again, resting his forehead briefly against the foal's soft mane. "Go with her," he whispered. "She'll keep you safe." With one last nudge, Brave turned and followed his mother. Luke stood and watched as they crossed the open plains, their figures silhouetted against the setting sun. The mare's stride was confident and purposeful, her tail swishing as she led her foal toward the horizon. Brave and full of curiosity, he galloped ahead before circling back to his mother's side. Just as they were about to disappear into the distance, Hope paused. She turned back one last time, her dark eyes meeting Luke's across the vast expanse. In that fleeting moment, Luke felt an overwhelming wave of gratitude and peace. He raised a hand, his chest tight but his heart full. "Take care of each other," he said softly, though his words were carried away by the wind. And then they were gone, their forms blending with the landscape as they rejoined the wild where they belonged. Luke stood there long after they disappeared, the sun dipping below the horizon and casting the world in twilight. The ranch felt quiet again. But this time, it wasn't the silence of loneliness, it was the silence of knowing he had done the right thing. As he walked back to the barn, Luke felt a sense of fulfillment he hadn't known he was missing. Hope and Brave had come into his life unexpectedly, but their journey had changed him in ways he hadn't anticipated. They had reminded him of the power of trust, the strength of resilience, and the beauty of letting go. If this story moved you, remember that acts of kindness can transform lives, whether human or animal. Hope and Brave's journey is a testament to the power of trust, resilience, and compassion. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and share it with someone who loves inspiring tales of survival and hope. Together, we can spread messages of courage and kindness.